Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, April 6th. Tonight, government messaging about the state of the COVID-19 pandemic has some experts worrying it may hinder uptake of fourth vaccine doses. Eligibility for fourth doses is expanding in some provinces. This comes after the National Advisory Committee on Immunization recommended people 70 and over get a second booster. Ontario is opening up fourth dose appointments for residents 60 and older starting Thursday, while Quebec will do the same next week. And several other provinces are making the shots available to older demographics. Dr. Kelly Grindrod is an associate professor at the University of Waterloo School of Pharmacy, and she says it will be hard to convince people to get an extra shot when they believe the pandemic is over. All right, well, meanwhile, the president of the Canadian Medical Association wants to see a data-based plan in tomorrow's federal budget to address the struggling healthcare system. Dr. Catherine Smart says the COVID-19 pandemic is a human health resource crisis and that it's dramatically impacting the ability of doctors, nurses, and other health workers to care for people. Professional associations report that medical workers have reduced their hours and left the industry in droves. They say there is no national plan to figure out exactly how many have been lost or how to replace them. Well, Manitoba's health minister says the government is not taking away nurses' vacation time to help the province deal with a backlog of postponed operations. But Audrey Gordon says there is a plan to increase the number of surgeries in the coming months. Shared Health, the organization that delivers healthcare in the province, says it has changed vacation scheduling for healthcare workers in surgery programs. The Manitoba Nurses Union says it's hearing that fewer nurses will be permitted to take time off. Union President Darlene Jackson says after a very long and difficult 2 years, such a request is one more blow to morale. Tensions continue to rise within Calgary's police service. The police's chief is speaking out on a recent order by the Calgary Police Commission. He says there will be a 2-week pause before his officers follow the order to stop wearing thin blue line patches on their uniforms. Mark Neufeld says police officers were incensed by the order, which calls for the patches to be removed by April 1st. He says morale at the police service is at an all-time low. This is due to low staffing levels and increased workloads. The commission says it stands by its decision to remove the symbol that has been connected to white supremacy, although for some, the patch commemorates fallen officers. Turning to Canada's airline industry now, Air Canada, Porter Airlines, and 16 other applicants want the Federal Court of Appeal to declare rules that involved compensation for passengers invalid. They argue the payments for the delayed flights and damaged luggage violates international standards. Federal rules currently state that passengers have to be compensated up to $2,100 for lost or damaged luggage and receive up to $1,000 in the event of delays or canceled flights. In Quebec, the Professional Association of Real Estate Brokers says last month's Montreal home prices crept up by an average of 17% from last year. Sales fell by almost 10%. The board says the median price of a single-family home reached over $565,000 in March. This is an 18% gain from a year ago. Sales for the month were down 13% from March of last year, totaling just under $5,500. On the East Coast, one of Canada's windiest provinces is ending a long-standing moratorium on the development of wind energy. Newfoundland and Labrador Energy Minister Andrew Parsons made the announcement yesterday. He says the province's relentless winds are now available to be harnessed. Mr. Parsons told the reporters the moratorium was introduced in 2007 and that he hopes it will be lifted in the coming months after his department works through some policy details. A 23-year-old Canadian is the reigning Jeopardy champ. Matea Roach had a slight lead going into Final Jeopardy last night, but she wagered considerably more than her closest rival and won more than $32,000. She said that would pay off her student loan. Ms. Roach was born in Nova Scotia but lives in Toronto. Turning to Saskatchewan now, where video tributes will be played today at the arena where the Humboldt Broncos play. It was 4 years ago today that a bus carrying the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team to a playoff game was hit by a semi-trailer in Tisdale. It killed 16 players and team staff and injured 13 others. City Manager Joe Day says the accident will be marked this afternoon. It'll feature a video tribute and drop-in gathering at the hockey arena where the Broncos play. Forum Daily's health segment is coming up next. We'll speak with Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director of Apple Tree Medical Group. Stay tuned. The UN Health Agency warns that because many countries have stopped widespread testing, many cases are likely going undetected. It is urging countries not to drop their COVID-19 protocols too quickly, and it says it's tracking an Omicron variant that is a recombination of two earlier versions. Meanwhile, Ontario residents aged 60 and older who had their first booster dose of a vaccine at least 5 months ago will be eligible for a second booster dose starting Thursday. Wastewater data suggests infections are almost as high as in early January when Omicron was at its peak. BC plans to offer people 70 and up a fourth dose this spring, while Nova Scotia is preparing for its second round of booster shots. Well, joining us now to give us the latest updates on COVID variants and vaccines is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group. Doctor, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Pleasure to be here.
So some concerning news here in terms of rising case counts across the country. What do we know so far about this, Dr. Raut?
Right. So the virus level has really been rising rapidly since mid-March. In the past week, it's really going up, and every day we are seeing it higher. Of course, we're looking at wastewater numbers. When we look at the case numbers, what we're seeing is we're currently at about 9,000 new cases and about 4,000 hospitalizations in Canada. In the beginning of January, we were seeing about 40,000 cases and about 4,000 hospitalizations. So still a little bit of a difference, and we've got to watch those hospitalization numbers more carefully.
Another thing to watch out for is this new Omicron variant, according to the UN Health Agency. They're saying it's a recombination of two earlier versions of the Omicron variant. It's being called the XE variant. So what information do we have on this?
We have very little at this time. What we do know is that the data from the UK suggests that XE is likely slightly more transmissible than even BA2, which was more transmissible than BA1. But the WHO has looked at it, and it does need more research there. XE currently makes up only 1% of the total COVID-19 cases in the UK. And there's no evidence so far to suggest that it is somehow immune to our vaccines or immune to natural immunity as well. So some good news in particular. Overall, I think it's a matter of seeing how quickly this can grow.
So should we be at all worried by these rising cases and this new XE variant, Dr. Raut?
Yeah, so I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions around XE, but what we're seeing so far is there's a high level of protection from vaccines and from natural immunity. So it's possible it may be more transmissible, but it doesn't mean that it's more severe. Given the sheer number of infections we've already seen with Omicron, I think we're going to see a fair number of natural immunity there. Keep in mind, recombinant variants are actually very common and they crop up all the time. I'm cautiously optimistic that there's no significant threat with this one. Looking at the fact that it's called the XE variant, we've had recombinant variants XA, B, C, D already, and none have been a major threat or concern. So far, cautiously optimistic there.
All right, Dr. Raut. Well, we mentioned Ontario is rolling out fourth doses of vaccines tomorrow. Just how necessary are these fourth doses?
So what we know now is that this fourth dose could really help people who are frail, people who are at the older end of the spectrum, and people who are at the greatest risk of a severe outcome of COVID. Do we know if it's going to really alter the trajectory of this wave? Unsure at this time, but we do know that it'll help individuals who are most at risk for severe outcomes.
And what about those who are of a younger demographic, Dr. Raut, especially those who may have already had 2 vaccine doses already? Should they consider a third and fourth booster dose?
That's right. For that, we really look at NACI, which is the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. So far, NACI is really recommending provinces prioritize people aged 80 and older, long-term care residents, and certainly the next step is 70 to 79 and moving down. It's still unclear on whether the younger adults and adolescents will necessarily benefit from a second booster shot.
All right, Dr. Rout, a minute left here, but how do booster doses compare to the full vaccine doses, and how could they help in protecting you and others during the pandemic?
It's a good question. So a COVID booster shot is basically an additional dose of the vaccine, which helps maintain strong protection from coronavirus disease, especially severe disease. Protection that you get from a normal dose starts to weaken faster than we thought. Even with Pfizer, even after 5 months, we were starting to see a fade of that immunity. So getting a booster dose helps really extend that protection even against Delta and Omicron variants. So far, we've got multiple studies by the CDC, as well as the Journal of American Medical Association, which really shows that this booster provides a lot more protection against Delta and Omicron variants than being fully vaccinated or even not vaccinated at all.
All right, Dr. Rout, thank you again for joining us for our health segment.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back. As gruesome videos and photos of bodies emerge from the Kyiv suburb of Bucha, Kremlin-backed media outlets are denouncing them as a hoax. In detailed broadcasts to millions of viewers, correspondents and hosts of Russian state TV channels are reporting on this, saying that some photo and video evidence of the killings were fake. This while others showed that Ukrainians were responsible for the bloodshed. But satellite images from early March show the dead were left out on the streets of Bucha for weeks. The photos and videos have set off a new wave of global condemnation and revulsion. Well, joining us now to get a better idea of what is happening on the ground in Ukraine is Dennis Thompson, retired Major General and Fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. General Thompson, welcome to Forum Daily, sir.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So we mentioned that Russian state TV are basically calling all of these civilian killings in Bucha a hoax. What evidence do we have of these atrocities, not only in Bucha, but we're hearing about civilian killings in Mariupol as well?
Well, as you mentioned, Nima, the satellite imagery itself is proof positive that this was done by the Russians, because the satellite imagery is dated from the period of the Russian occupation. In addition, you've got reputable reporters on the scene within hours of the Russian withdrawal, and they are soliciting eyewitness reports. And these are reporters that have been in several war zones. And plus, on top of that, is all the smartphone cameras, which didn't exist in previous wars, that have recorded a number of atrocities in live time. So the bottom line is the Russians have claimed these are fakes. They have been run through a bunch of media experts who have pointed out where the Russian errors are and have essentially debunked it. This is, without question, Russian atrocities.
And I want to take a deeper look at this misinformation used by Russia. So how is fake news being used within Russia to justify its invasion of Ukraine, sir?
Well, Russian TV, as you probably know, is closely controlled, and it's unlike the West, it's filtered through the government. And it's something that, frankly, the older generation of Russia depends on. You'll also be aware that, of course, a number of independent media sites were essentially shut down by the Russian government as this conflict kicked off. In the past, they just shouted over top of them, but this time they believe it's necessary to actually shut them down. So the only access you have to accurate information in Russia is to go through the internet, and for that you basically need a VPN. And unless you're able to dig that deep, you're not going to get the truth, as it were. So essentially, the Russian population lives in an echo chamber that is controlled by the Russian government. That's how they are portraying this conflict as war and getting the news out to their population, at least their side of it.
And meanwhile, NATO Secretary General is saying that Russian forces are repositioning for a critical phase of the war. So what exactly is this critical phase, and what do you expect this to look like?
Well, I think it's no secret that the Russians, as we've already talked about, have pulled back from Kyiv and the area around Kyiv and back into Russia, and have repositioned to take parts of the east and the southern parts of Ukraine. They're aimed clearly at the Donbass, and of course they want to take out Mariupol. The whole military idea is to create a land bridge between the Donbass region and Russia, and the bit that they've already annexed in 2014, which is the Crimea. I think we can expect to see a lot of combat in that area. I'm not convinced that the Russians have the stomach for it anymore. There are lots of reports of continued low Russian morale and, in fact, combat refusals on the part of some combat forces that have been committed to this fight. So what that means is that Russia will continue to pound civilian areas in an effort to get them to surrender. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. The initiative has clearly shifted from Russia to Ukraine, and that is good news.
All right, sir, just a quick 45 seconds left here, but advocates are calling for more action by Canada in this war. So what else can we do as a country?
Well, I think we need to say really quickly that Canada has done an awful lot. Under this Operation Unifier that you may have heard of, Canada has trained over 30,000 junior leaders in Ukraine since 2015. And it's that change in command culture inside the Ukrainian military that has done a lot. So that's a plus. We need to reinforce the enhanced forward presence battle group that we have in Latvia under Operation Reassurance, and NATO has committed to more forces to that area to make sure that Russia doesn't try to nibble that off. And finally, we have to take this 2% of GDP target seriously, and I hope to see some big movement on behalf of this government during the budget, which is about to be announced on Thursday.
All right, General Thompson, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
My pleasure.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says negotiations with Ukraine are continuing, but there is a fairly long road ahead. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky used a speech to Ireland's parliament to accuse Russia of using hunger as a weapon of war. This by deliberately targeting his nation's essential food supplies. Russian ally China said today that the reports and images of civilian deaths in Bucha are deeply disturbing and called for an investigation. Moscow continues to allege that Ukraine has faked the incidents, and meanwhile, the mayor of Mariupol says over 5,000 people have been killed in the besieged city. Well, Ukraine is not the only nation in war, at least according to Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. They have issued a new report that claims of war crimes and crimes against humanity within Ethiopia's Tigray region. The rights group say in the report released Wednesday that the crimes were perpetrated by security officials and civilian authorities in the neighboring Amhara region. This sometimes with the support of federal Ethiopian forces. The report says that abuses are part of a widespread and systematic attack against the Tigrayan civilian population. There is some good news in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The World Health Organization reports that the number of COVID cases worldwide has dropped for a second week in a row to 9 million. It is also confirming that COVID-19 deaths fell by 16% last week to more than 26,000. But the UN Health Agency warns that because many countries have stopped widespread testing, many cases are likely going undetected. It is urging countries not to drop their COVID-19 protocols too quickly and says it is tracking an Omicron variant that is a recombination of two earlier versions. Moving to Greece now, where public transport has largely ground to a halt in the capital and state-run services remain shuttered. This comes as workers walk off the job in a 24-hour general strike to protest rising prices. State-run hospitals are treating emergency cases only as healthcare workers join the strike. It was called by the country's two main umbrella unions for public and private sector workers. They are demanding salary increases and measures to tackle rising prices. The government of Sri Lanka is also facing backlash from citizens. However, the minister says Sri Lanka's president will not step down. Sri Lanka has endured months of shortages of fuel and other essentials, and the protests over the economic troubles have spread nationwide. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has resisted the calls for him to resign. This even after members of his own coalition made them this week. The main opposition party has rejected Mr. Rajapaksa's proposal for a unity government, and several governing party lawmakers say they won't vote with the coalition. Back in the U.S., one expert says problems with the electricity grid are the early warning that climate change is here. Analysis of government data shows power outages from severe weather across the U.S. have doubled in just 20 years. This comes as climate change produces more destructive storms. 40 states are experiencing longer outages, which can be harmful or even deadly for the elderly, disabled, and other vulnerable people. Meanwhile, thousands of cryptocurrency enthusiasts are gathering in Miami. The city is building its reputation as one of the key locations to develop the blockchain technology. Dozens of companies are using the Bitcoin 2022 conference, running through Wednesday through Friday, as a venue to network, pitch ideas, and share announcements to the industry and beyond. Well, it's a known fact that hearing loss can lead to isolation and frustration for those who experience it. Researchers from an MIT spin-off called Frequency Therapeutics is seeking to reverse hearing loss, and they have a new drug candidate that might be able to achieve this very goal. This drug uses small molecules to help stimulate the growth of hair cells in a person's inner ear. Clinical trials with this medication showed significant improvements to both the hearing of participants as well as their ability to recognize words and understand speech. This only after a single injection. One of Frequency Therapeutics' founders, MIT Institute professor Robert Langer, has been thrilled watching their work mature into an impactful drug candidate in clinical trials. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You could also watch all of our commentary, programming, and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today on Forum Daily News, and we'll see you next time. Take care, Canada.